Anyway, we are going on with our study in the book of Luke. You want to open your Bibles to Luke chapter 5. We're studying starting in 27. And let's begin. After this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector by the name of Levi sitting at the tax booth. "Follow me," Jesus said to him. And Levi got up and left everything and followed him. Then Levi had held a great banquet for Jesus and at his house, and a large crowd of tax collectors and others were eating with him. Pretty simple story. Does anybody find it somewhat abbreviated? I mean, there's a couple of times where these kinds of things are described where Jesus is collecting his 12. And it's like, well, Jesus sees them on the road. He says, "Follow me." And they go, "Okay, follow you." And it sounds like the first time they meet, doesn't it? So this is exactly that way. It sounds like it. It sounds like Matthew, in a way, is some kind of zombie. He just goes, "Okay, I'll follow you," you know? Clearly that isn't what happens. Let's look at the next slide. You got to get a feel for the geography. That is, on the upper right, is the ruins of Capernaum. If you look at sort of the middle to the left part of it, there's a white structure. That's the synagogue. It was an immense synagogue for the area. And actually, that's the smaller one built in the 3rd century. The bigger one that Jesus would teach at every Sabbath was even bigger than that. So it was an enormous building. It would probably hold 1,000 people or more, which is huge for that era. That is just a little pile of rocks that's been excavated. If you look kind of to the top of the picture, you see there's more unexcavated. It was a pretty good-sized town. If you look to the right of that white structure, there's like an octagon or a hexagon kind of structure. That's a 1st century church that is believed to be built over Peter's house, Peter's mother-in-law's house, where Peter lived. See, it's right by the water, right by the wharf, because he was a fisherman. And it's also believed that Jesus lived in that house, kind of rented a room from Peter. You can go there today and kind of walk around. There's actually a Catholic church built on top of that now, which is a lot in the Middle East. Down here on the left, just kind of an artist's rendition of Capernaum. It was really a bustling city. I think Doug has kind of been describing that. It's a fisherman's city. Look at all the wharfs coming out. You know, it was a very, very, very busy place. Also, you can't see it on either of the pictures. There was a road, an inland road that went right past Capernaum, which was a major trade route. And it would take trading people from the Mediterranean, and it was one way to go all the way to India, actually. So if you were someone in Egypt trying to sell your goods to India, you very likely would come across this road. There was only a selection of 2 or 3 roads you could come across, and this was one of them. This was a very bustling place, very busy place. And Matthew, it says, is a toll collector. So he is collecting a tax along the road. And you know from the story, and we'll see it here, that Matthew is not a well-liked person. And I remember when I grew up, it was always because he was a tax collector, but he was more than just a tax collector. He's collecting a tax along a road that used to not have a tax on it. And what happened was Herod the Great was the king of this whole region, but then when he died, they split the region into 3 territories, and a territorial border is very close to Capernaum. In other words, when they split the territories, there's a state line, if you would, just east of Capernaum, probably half a mile. And that undoubtedly is the toll booth for Matthew. And it's really, the gospel kind of brings it out. It's a little subtle, but it brings it out, that Peter and Andrew are brothers. And they're actually from a town called Bethsaida, which is further east of this town, but only about a mile. And now Peter lives in Capernaum, this town. Maybe Andrew does too, because he fishes with Peter. But if they're going to go home for Sabbath dinner, they have to cross the toll. So they have to pay a tax to go to Mom's house, who lives in Bethsaida. So this is another reason why they hate people like Matthew, because when they didn't used to pay a tax, now they have to pay a tax. Well, it gets even worse. The tax that they charged was a tax that originates in Rome. This is a Roman territory. So Rome would say to Judah, it was called Palestine at this time. So they'd say to Palestine, "We want so much tax." And the Herod's sons, they had to collect so much tax. Well, then they had to make money on the tax. So then they had to collect tax from within the provinces. And so they had various ways of collecting tax. So when this border went up, it was just far too tempting for the Herods to be able to collect tax along the border. So, but the way the tax worked is, it was a flat tax, but probably the best way to describe it in our culture is, we know that it costs, what, $4 to go across the Bay Bridge? $5 now? Okay. I've done that for a while. It's 5. Well, it's 6? Okay, whatever. It's 10, whatever it is. Yeah. Who knows? By noon it'll be 10. But it's a flat tax, right? I mean, everybody theoretically pays the same unless you pay a little bit less for that little fast track thing. We all pay the same. Well, that's not the way these taxes work. It might be $5 to cross that border, and Matthew might charge $5 to most people. And then it'd be like the bridge if a really nice car comes across. Well, Matthew might charge $10. And then if Peter comes across the border and Matthew doesn't like Peter, it might be $50. And this was completely legal. Completely legal. And then it says that you get another hint in the story. It says that after Matthew converts, he throws this huge feast. Well, when you go to this area in the Middle East, you realize it's mostly peasantry, and they live in very small, really one-room homes. So to even be able to throw a feast, to have a big enough place to throw a feast, he is part of the elite. At least he's part of the rich. He's very wealthy. So he's not charging $5. He's charging $10 to everybody. He's charging a lot of money. So he is hated because he's a tax collector. He's doubly hated because he's a Jew and he's sold out to the Romans. He's a tax collector. He's triply hated because even in Roman society, tax collectors, I'll read you what the commentator said. Tax collectors were viewed similarly to prostitutes, pimps, and drug dealers. They're the lowest of society. You know, Rome was a very classist society. They're just the lowest of low. So even the Romans didn't like them. They were necessary evils to collect these exorbitant taxes that Rome demanded. So Matthew is triply hated. There's no fairness to this system at all. All of this was perfectly legal, and they're viewed so badly. So it's a really kind of a shocking thing that Matthew converts. I mean, the reader of this story is going to go, wow, Matthew converted. And something's been going on inside of Matthew, obviously, something behind the scenes. But when he converts, he really converts. He must have seen Jesus around. He must have heard him preach. Maybe he's seen his miracles. And God has been working on Matthew in some way. And then what he does is he throws this big, huge party. And you have to ask the question, well, what kind of party is it? I mean, it's a party that all the religious people aren't going to. It's all of Matthew's friends. So, what kind of party do pimps and prostitutes and drug dealers go to? And, you know, at this point in time, we all kind of want to clean it up, clean up the scriptures, and kind of go, well, you know, maybe it's not like that, but what kind of parties do they go to? So this is going to be a loud party, somewhat of a wild party. Matthew doesn't know any better. Now, I'm sure it's not as wild and crazy as it would have been without Jesus there. But really, what's part of the shocking part of this story is not that Matthew throws a party. Part of the shocking part of the story is that Jesus shows up. Now, I know for myself, in my own history, when I first got saved, I didn't have anybody to actually lead me to Christ. I grew up Catholic, and I heard this one priest one time. He said, you know, when I stopped praying to God, asking him to get me out of trouble and do all these things for me, and I started praying, God, here's my life. What do you want me to do? He said, my spiritual life exploded. Suddenly I could see things and understand things that I never could understand. Well, he was talking about a conversion experience. And in Catholicism, there's no context for that, so he didn't call it that. I heard that at 16, and it always stuck in my mind. I was never ready for that until I was about 19. At that point in time, I was ready to pray that prayer. And I said, God, I don't know what you want me to do, but here I am. And the same thing happened to me. I started reading the Bible. I'd been 12 years in Catholic school, heard all the stories, but they meant nothing to me. Suddenly I read the Bible and it's like, wow, I just couldn't get enough of it. So my eyes were open. I started calling God Father, which was definitely not going to be acceptable by my Catholic friends. And I just didn't tell anyone. Well, after about 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks, I just had to tell somebody. So I invited my best friend over, and I did what I always did. I didn't have anybody disciple me, tell me how to behave. I just did what I always did. I bought a bottle of tequila, and we sat out in my backyard, and I told them about Christ. Now, this is not an evangelism plan for this church. It's not a recommendation. It was a very bad idea. It was a crazy idea, but I didn't know any better. And Matthew was throwing that kind of party. And shockingly, Jesus showed up there. And shockingly, Jesus really showed up with my friend. Because what happened was, he didn't convert that night, but he really heard me. So a few months later, I actually ended up being followed up and discipled by the navigators and kind of learned how to behave. But about that time, a few months later, he got engaged and he asked me to be the best man in his wedding. And so the wedding's coming up a few months, and then he said, well, I want you to plan the bachelor party. That's the job of best man. I want you to plan the bachelor party with my brother. So his brother was just going a direction that, yeah, was just not a good direction. And I just kept trying to pull him back, and there just was no luck. So about a week before the wedding, I said to my friend, I said, look, if that's the party, I'm not going. And my friend understood. But all of my other friends, they were done with me. They were done. I was a judgmental Christian. But interestingly enough, the guy who was the most to be offended completely understood. In fact, he defended me with my friends. Because that night, even though it was a crazy, dumb party, he actually saw something. And he knew it was real. He never argued with it. And he defended me with my other friends. Shockingly, Jesus shows up to Matthew's party. And shockingly, Jesus showed up to mine also. And it's really funny because Matthew, again, the reader here especially, we need to feel this, that Matthew is such an unlikely character to ever find Christ. The other learning I get from this passage is there's people in my life and I go, oh, I've never going to find the Lord. Give up. I have a family member like that, and just in the last year or two, this family member has become the most interested in the gospel and has been asking me all kinds of questions. Go figure that. But God has secretly been working on Matthew as he listens to Jesus out in public areas, as he watches Jesus heal people, as he felt the futility of his own life and the rejection of his own society against him, both Jewish and Roman. And boy, is he converted, because this party is quite a party. He invites everybody he knows. So it's this enormous party, and it has Jesus there, really as the forum. He wants to introduce people to Jesus, which is just so cool. I think sometimes we, as Christians, we cower away from introducing people to Jesus because we're kind of afraid. They might not do it right. They might have questions that I can't answer. And I'm sure Matthew had the same issue because he has Jesus there to answer all those questions. For us, though, I prefer to think about evangelism as the blind guy in John 9. He is miraculously healed of blindness. And it says through the story that nobody in the history of the world has ever been healed of blindness. In fact, the prophecies about Messiah point this to be a Messiah sign, that Messiah would be the one to give sight to the blind. And so the Pharisees are very ticked off. This happens under the steps of the tent. And they're very ticked off. And they ask the guy, so they ask him all kinds of those questions that he can't answer. Well, who is this guy? Where is he from? And what do you think he is? Do you think he's Messiah? And the guy has the best testimony that any of us could ever possibly have. I was blind, and now I see. I have no idea how to answer your question. But I was blind, and now I see. And this is Matthew. This is his only answer. Let's move on. Verse 30. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law who belonged to their sect complained to his disciples, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" Jesus answered them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but the sinners to repentance." Now, at first glance, it sounds kind of like a slam, like he's calling his own dinner guests sick. The word actually doesn't mean sick. It means disenfranchised, which is precisely what these people are, and they know it. They're disenfranchised. They're not included in any society. They're not included in Jewish society. They're not included in Roman society. And Jesus says, no, this is precisely who I come for. Because they were shocked that Jesus was at this party. Of course, we frankly would be shocked. Moving on, verse 33, they said to him, "John's disciples often fast and pray, and so do the disciples of the Pharisees. But yours go on eating and drinking." Jesus answered, "Can you make the guests of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, and in those days he will fast." It's interesting that Jesus basically says, I'm at a party. You're asking me to fast. You're asking me to put on mourning kind of attire and fast. That's what fasting is. It's a sorrowful, reflective kind of time. But he's at a party. And he goes even further. He goes, look, I'm like the bridegroom. And this is a wedding. It's even a really important party. Now, in their culture, this is a really big deal. A wedding is a really big deal. For us, it would be too. Nobody goes to a wedding and says, oh, no, I can't. Nobody does that. It would almost be rude in our culture. It is horribly rude in their culture. In the Middle East, if anybody just puts food down in front of you at their house, you're obligated to eat it. It's rude not to. And then at a wedding, if you're not going to participate in a wedding. So it's Jesus' way of pushing back to these guys. Like, you guys got it all wrong. The time now is celebration. The bridegroom is here. The feast has begun. It's especially offensive. These Pharisees are offended that Jesus is not offended at Matthew and his crowd. They don't like the fact he's at this party, and they now want Jesus to actually be rude. They actually want Jesus to take on a fasting kind of genre to offend Matthew and his friends. They want him to be rude and judgmental and mean-spirited like they are. It's probably because, religion, rules, they lose meaning. They lose a life lived by rules is a life that loses relevance. Rules make everything lose meaning. Rules turn people into mindless, lifeless, bitter people, which these Pharisees had become. They kill life. They completely distort life and truth. It's like that old joke about rigid Christians. And, you can pick your Christian sect, whether it's the Baptists or the Nazarenes or whatever. And the joke goes like this. Well, why do rigid Christians not approve of premarital sex? It might lead to dancing. That's what rules do. And then this is Jesus' argument with the Pharisees all over the place. Look, you strain out a gnat because that's unclean and you can't drink that in your water, but you swallow a camel. You clean the outside of the cup to look good on the outside, but you do nothing about the inside. And you're full of treachery. That's what rules do. They clean up the outside. But they make your system of relevance completely lost, as these people have become. The hearer of this argument between Jesus and the Pharisees would understand that the king is here, the kingdom has arrived. Death will soon be eliminated. The curse, the fall will soon be gone. And if nothing else, what they could have understood right then and there is Matthew, the lost of the lost, has now been found. It is a time to celebrate. Matthew, shockingly, has been found. And now he's even reaching out to his friends. God's mercy has arrived for Matthew. It's now active. Healings. This whole community, they've got healings, they've got life-giving teaching, they've got relationship with God, creating a new world with the righteous king there, and these guys want Jesus to mourn and fast. Let's move on, verse 36. He told them this parable. No one tears a patch from a new garment and sews it onto an old one. If he does, he will have torn the new garment, and the patch from the new will not match the old. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the new wine will burst the skins, the wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No, new wine must be poured into new wineskins. And no one, after drinking old wine, wants the new, for he says the old is better. He's underscoring something. He's already said, look, the kingdom is here, the party has happened. And you can't mix the two. You can't mix what was with what is. And it's really, it's not that you can mix a little bit, or you can meld it together. You cannot mix it. You can't take a little small piece of new and sew it into the old. I don't sew, so I don't know why that is. But the analogy is clear. You can't do it. There is no room here. You can't take new wine and pour it into old wineskins. That's not a cup worth, a molecule worth. That's none. None at all. And it's really quite powerful when you realize what he's talking about. He's talking about the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. The old way of the Old Testament and the new way of Christ and the New Covenant. It's quite clear. It cannot be mixed. It's kind of a hard thing for people of faith, actually. Transition, moving, changing is a difficult thing, especially in this topic. And the problem is, when things are hard for us, people of faith, we tend to do precisely what he's telling us to never do. We tend to mix it. We tend to do this with the New Covenant. We adopt the New Covenant, we kind of mix it with the Old. This analogy makes it clear there is no part, there is no mixing. It's kind of an unprecedented verse in Christian history here. There is no mixing between the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. Jesus understood what needed to take place. It's not a modification, it's not an improvement of the old. It's a complete conversion from the old to the new. It's not learning a new concept, not a better improvement, not a modification. It's complete abandoning of the old and adopting of the new. It's a life transformation, maybe more importantly, a heart transformation, something that changes you from the inside. And a great deal of church history, unfortunately, has not done this. I think one of the reasons Paul identifies in Romans 7. Paul has a really interesting passage here. He says, let me just read it to you. He says, we know that the law is spiritual, but I am unspiritual, sold as a slave to sin. I do not understand what I do. But what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. Now if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. As it is no longer I myself who do it, but it is sin living in me. I know that nothing good lives in me, that is, in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For what I do is not the good I want to do. No, the very evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. I do not understand. So if you were to capsulize what he says here, and I want you to picture yourself as sitting down with a friend and having this friend tell you, I don't understand what I do. For what I want to do, I don't do. And what I hate, I do. In fact, the thing I find really evil, I do those things. Now, if you had this friend talk to you like this, you might sit there and think, okay, you don't understand what you do. You need Christ. Next, you can't control your behavior. You want to do something, but you don't do it. Well, it gets even worse. Then you say the stuff that you hate, you keep on doing. And even worse than that, the very evil, things that repulse you, you actually do. And I think one of the reasons in church history, Christianity, even in church culture today, we tend to mix the old and the new covenant. It's because we fail to actually be honest the way Paul is being honest. Because Paul is really being quite honest with the Christian experience. He's just saying, look, I have this desire to do what is right. I have holiness in my soul, and I want that and desire that. But I find something else at work. And if you look at my behavior, you see a spotty production. Sometimes I do what I know is right. Sometimes I do not. And in church culture throughout the ages, that truth has been somewhat unacceptable for a Christian to admit that I don't always do what I want to do. And sometimes I do the wrong thing. And so, really, when you look at what Paul's saying, he's describing something kind of crazy. I mean, you don't do what you want to do, you do what you don't want to do. It's kind of kooky. And he calls it normal. And he says, we ought to just be honest about this. We ought to be honest with the fact that we've got these forces inside of us, and they make us do things that we don't want to do. But instead of being honest, in church culture, we tend to not say about it sometimes. In some churches, throughout history, man, it's just simply not been acceptable to admit something like this. And instead of just admitting what we all experience, we end up with a kind of different kind of crazy. Because if you're not honest about that, then you're going to cover it some way, kind of a crazy way. I'll just give you my experience. When I came to faith, I came to a place where I knew I needed God. I needed a Savior. I could not do this on my own. I was not good enough. God had to save me. He had to redeem me. He had to do the work to transform me. And we all in church would say, praise God. The sinner recognizes his sin, and God has redeemed. The power of God is at work. But you see, then I got in, and the message was kind of, you better behave yourself. And I don't think this is an uncommon experience. I've got some nods around the room. Kind of have a week, not this church, not that church, anything. It's just kind of a culture. It kind of feels that way, doesn't it? That's kind of crazy. So somehow the grace that saves me is not, it washes my sins away, but now that I'm in, I better behave and keep those sins away all by myself. It's mixing the old with the new. To the sinner we say, you're forgiven, your sins are washed. But to the believer we say, you better behave. Grace has the power to save people. We all know that. But sometimes it seems kind of powerless to transform us. So grace was so powerful to save the sinner, yet grace cannot change us. Church is very clear. The church today especially, I think, is very good and very clear. Church culture about saving grace. I think if you went back 100 years, 150 years, the saving message was more about you better be a good person and then God might like you. So the message today is much more pure for the sinner, I think. It's a saving grace. It's God has paid the price. Jesus has paid for all your sins. You need to receive Christ. And that grace will apply to you and make you a saint. I think it's very clear. I think transforming grace, the church is terrible. It's confusing at best to us. But the truth of Jesus is scandalous. It's the Jesus who goes scandalously to a party we all think he shouldn't really be there. And scandalously, the truth of the New Testament is shockingly scandalous. Because the fact of the matter is, my sins are his problem. That's the New Testament. That's the New Covenant. Now, if you're like me, there's a part of you inside that's, I don't know. Part of me's going, did I really say that out loud? I want to prove it to you in about 10 seconds from Scripture. Jesus hung on the cross, and he took on all of my sins. Not just the ones before I became a saint, but all of them. So you see, my sins are his problem. My sins became his problem 2,000 years ago. and I can't grab it back. And I can't transform myself to find myself. The grace and the power that saved me must be the grace and the power that transforms me. That's the new covenant. Again, I admit to you, because I think I'm not alone, but that's a funny thing about the way we think. We challenge us all in the way we think. Our culture says, if it feels good, do it. Our culture tells us in more subtle ways, hey, whatever you've got going inside of you, hey, it's right. Whatever you think, whatever you feel, it's right. And it came from, from our culture, it came from the 1960s. If it feels good, do it. That's a 1960s mantra. But you know what? That is an ancient mantra. In the book of Galatians, it says, of unbelievers, it says, their God is their stomach. That means whatever their gut feeling is, that's what they do. So for us, challenged by the New Testament, we have something we go, wow, I can't believe I said that out loud. Is that really what it is? It sounds like I'm shirking responsibility. I can't let this gut rule the truth. Because the truth is, Jesus died for all my sins. And we've got to live with that tension. We've got to let our minds, perceived by the book, this is true. This here in my stomach may or may not be true, and I will not let it be my God to let you lead me around. That's what that verse means. Their God is their stomach means they just let their gut lead them around. Is that our culture or what? Does anybody think that's not our culture? But that's not right. This is true. And this gets into here sometimes, hopefully more often than not. And then this has to inform this. Let's do something. Bear with me. Humor me. Let's all close our eyes. Everyone close your eyes. And I want you to remember something that you're ashamed of. Maybe yesterday, last week. Might be some of us, we carry things that we're ashamed of from 2 years ago. But just briefly think about it. I want you to put yourself in that place where you felt ashamed. And now I want you to picture Jesus in the same room as you. And look into his face. And see the compassion, the love, the understanding the New Testament says he has for you. Notice the smile on his face. And then above him, hear the words from the Father. You are my son, or you are my daughter, in whom I am well pleased. Keep your eyes closed for a minute. I know that some of you I've lost right now. Some of you may believe what I'm saying, but it's hard to picture that. That's me, oftentimes. My words sometimes make no sense to me. It's hard for me to picture the face of Jesus smiling upon me when I feel like I'm at my worst. We need to understand the new, and we need to fully embrace the new and not be influenced by the old. Okay, open your eyes. The truth is, he paid for us. He died for us. He has no more wrath for us. He has no disappointment for us because he nailed it to the cross. It doesn't exist anymore. He's not troubled by our sins. He dealt with them. Now, if you sunk into this and your heart was melted, you understand the new covenant. And to the extent that you didn't melt with that experience, to that extent, you have mixed the old with the new. And I'll just tell on myself, well, some days I'm mixed pretty badly. I feel really ashamed of whatever I did. And I have difficulty believing the new covenant. And other days I find it easy. But my mind is constantly informing my heart. I'm not going to give up on that. And that should melt our hearts. That's the experience of the new covenant. When my crazy kicks in, I do things I am not proud of. I can't believe I did that, is usually what I tell myself. And maybe for me it's even worse. I mean, look where I am. I'm standing up in front of all you people. Aren't I supposed to be better? Just as crazy as Paul. Let's close with this verse. Titus 2, 11 and 12. The grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation to all men, instructing us to deny ungodliness and worldly desires, and to live sensibly, righteously, and godly in the present age. Great verse. That's my heart. I want to be godly. I want to deny ungodliness and worldly desires. I want to live sensibly, righteously, and godly. That's my heart. The old never worked. Jesus came on the scene. The old wasn't working then. It hadn't worked for thousands of years. It never was going to work. This word instructing. You see this word that we're supposed to instruct? Be instructed. The word actually means to train. And it's like weight training. It takes many repetitions of a weight to build a muscle. Repetitions. So what this verse is saying is, if you want to be godly, you have to do many repetitions of something. Many repetitions of what? First verse. The grace of God. You have to repeatedly remind yourself and experience the grace of God. There is no other way. The old covenant didn't work. That is the new covenant. And it's not just you had it in your head, okay, it's done. No. You have to experience it, and you have to repeatedly train your heart to experience the new covenant. And I love this. What are you experiencing? You're experiencing the unmerited kindness of God. That's what grace is. It is the undeserved smile of Jesus on you. And the unearned word from the Father of how pleased He is with you. I want to be better. We don't want to walk with God. The only way to really do that is to let go of the old and walk with Him. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your Son and His extreme, immense pain He made to give us something new, to truly transform us, Father. And Lord, I pray that we all enter into that battle between our minds and our gut feeling and inform our insides of what truth is, that it is only the new covenant that works. Teach us, Father, to not mix that with the old any longer. In Jesus' name.